911, where's your emergency?
Yes, please send an ambulance to North Pascagoula Street, please.
What's going on?
A log fell on a gentleman's leg across from the Oasis Church.
Okay, stay on the line. I'm going to connect you to the ambulance. We're getting more help to you, okay?
I had a friend that wanted the limbs trimmed off a tree. Trimmed the tree down, trimmed it down to about an 8-foot stump. As we were cutting the stump down, it shifted. And then when it shifted, of course I was pretty close to it, and I couldn't move out of the way fast enough.
My sister called me and said, Dad's at the hospital, he's broken his leg. Didn't know much more than that, and the only way we knew that is he had his phone in his pocket, and when he came in, the guy that works here got his phone out of his pocket, called Donna, my sister, from my dad's phone, so that he knew she'd answer that.
I tried to get back, I couldn't get a flight out, and I didn't really say a whole lot because it takes time to think about all that stuff, and I had to be very positive. I was determined I was going to be very positive.
So we receive a call through our, what we call our bat phone. It's our red ambulance phone. An elderly patient, Mr. Crum, had a 2,000-pound tree trunk roll over his entire body. So we were all expecting the worst.
He's talking, he's alert, he does not have any trouble breathing. Okay, good, let's move on to breathing and then circulation. He had good pulses everywhere. But then we started evaluating where he was actually injured and noticing the extent and how tender he is in his abdomen and his pelvis.
He was sitting up on the table in the trauma room talking to me like I'm talking now. I mean, he was completely coherent.
He was alert to an extent, I believe, when he first came in, and then rapidly started declining.
So they took him up for a CT scan, and while he was on the CT table, he apparently threw up, sucked it down his lungs, aspirated, and that's where everything kind of went south.
It didn't look good. It was, once you start aspirating, you're an elderly patient, you got all this blood, you're bleeding out, you don't work as if it's not looking good. You work as like, I'm gonna save this patient regardless.
We get him intubated, and then I learn about what's going on with his pelvis. And I've been doing this long enough to where I know what needs to go somewhere pretty quickly, else that we're not gonna be able to take care of. So I realized we gotta get him over to South.
Dispatched us out. They let us know it's Singing River Hospital in Pascagoula, transporting to USA Medical Center.
We brought him back down, got him intubated, and I believe that's when we started giving blood. We initiated life flight to get him going to a higher level of care.
He's intubated. We had sedatives on board before we left. Mr. Crum's blood pressure wasn't exactly that great. He was a very, very, very sick patient.
The drive over there was, gosh, I can't even describe just the thoughts going through your mind. Of course, you start thinking about the childhood memories. Sorry. But there's just so much raced through your head at that point. It was really kind of hard to focus. I remember watching for the helicopter, trying to see where they were.
En route, right before we got to USA Medical Center, he became bradycardic. His heart rate went down into the 40s. We actually had to use some drugs to get his heart rate back up before we could get him into the trauma center, in the trauma bay. His blood pressure we could manage, but once I seen him start becoming bradycardic, it did cross through my mind that this man might not make it.
What I later found out is that they lost him twice on the way. But the nurse on board was able to revive him. And it just so happened that the pilot, about the time I walked in the door, the pilot texted me, said, "We're on the ground, we're pulling him in right now." So
we received him and reevaluated all his injuries. I repeated the CAT scans to see the changes that had happened with his pelvis, and there had been a substantial amount of bleeding from his pelvic fractures into his pelvis.
But I remember him coming up, and he was unresponsive, extremely cold. We had a bear hugger on him to warm him up. He was getting lots of blood products.
All that blood had come out of his broken bones and into his pelvis, but that meant that it wasn't in his blood vessels anymore. So he needed transfusions of blood products to carry the oxygen. He needed transfusion of plasma to restore his clotting factors. He needed platelets to help with the blood clotting. So rushing into the operating room probably would have been the worst possible thing we could have done for him. The key is in a critically injured patient to resuscitate him, restore your body back to homeostasis or back to its baseline, and then proceed to the operating room as you can.
When Mr. Crum first came to the emergency department, the general surgery trauma team worked him up, and they advised us that he had a femur fracture as well as a pelvic ring injury. He had a lot of issues going on. He had lung injury, pelvis injury, as well as a femoral shaft fracture. So the general surgery trauma team, they make sure that all of his vitals are appropriate. His scenario, we weren't able to take him right to the operating room because he had lung injury and it wasn't safe for him to go to the operating room. And in that scenario, we do some temporary stabilization.
That was a major turning point because from that point on, for the next 10 days, he had no response whatsoever.
I didn't even go home. I went straight to the hospital in USA. And every doctor and nurse I saw, and when I would talk to them, they would say, he's not going to leave the hospital.
Truthfully, we didn't know if Mr. Crum was going to survive his injuries. And if we have a patient who may not survive, or we feel like there is a small chance of survival, we're not going to put that patient through surgery because that surgery is another insult to the patient and can actually cause more harm than good.
The following Thursday, and he was still no change, no response, still in ICU. And that's when the doctors pretty much told us, they had him on the ventilator and said, you guys are going to have to make a decision.
It didn't look good. If you want to, look at it in the natural, it did not look good. And I don't know what to say about it because it was bad. When your brain goes out of oxygen, you just don't come back, out of all this.
I remember telling his son, Mr. Phillip, how, in a matter of seconds, if you aspirate and you lose oxygenation to your brain, you can actually get a noxic brain injury. And that's what we were kind of thinking had happened to him. And it was very difficult for us and very difficult for the family, of course, to understand that and to make the right decision of what were they supposed to do.
So as time passed, we were getting daily reports. We would try to set him up and say, if he's doing better tomorrow, we'll try to get him in the operating room and get him fixed. Day by day passes, and it got to a point where there was discussions being had with the family as far as withdrawal of care even.
We took the family members and we went aside and we said, let's pray. And we're gonna believe God. And I tried to encourage them, which I did encourage them, and let them know we knew in our hearts that Mr. Crum was not gonna die because the Lord just spoke to me and told me his time was not yet.
We're just going to let the family make a decision and let the ICU team take care of the patient. And if they need us, we're right there to help.
I felt like, Mr. Crum's really in there and that Mr. Phillip could come in and he was like, my dad, he looked at me. And I was like, oh, really?
His son was sitting there and he says, his son looked at him and said, do you know who I am? And he shook his head. And then Phillip said, squeeze my hand if you know who I am. And he squeezed his hand. So Phillip went to get all the doctors and nurses and say, hey, he's here, he's here.
He shook his head yes, and then when he squeezed my hand, that was just the icing on the cake. And I was calling nurses. I said, Will, you guys get in here. And he's responding.
After all the reports we'd heard, that was exciting.
So once that happened, 2 days later, they had to change gears. Okay, we've got to do surgery on this guy. He's got a busted pelvis, he's got a femur broken. He had him in traction still to keep the femur alive.
Once he got to that point, we were able to look at his injuries, and surgery went very well. In this scenario, we had to open up the fracture site, put clamps on, and reposition the bone in order to get it fixed.
They moved him into a room after so long, and they still had to tie him down because he was still using that leg. He was going to get up out of that bed. He was going to get up. But he doesn't really remember.
I didn't remember anything for 6 weeks. I was in Mobile for 6 weeks. I have no recollection of what happened there.
He did improve, a little bit day by day, and they were getting him up out of the bed while he was there, put him in a chair. They even did that when he was in ICU, got him up out of the bed, put him in a chair.
I had a picture on my phone when I came in one day, and I think it was actually right before the surgery. And they've got him sitting on the edge of the bed and looking over and smiling. I said, "Dad, smile. I need to take a picture." And he kind of, of course, at that point he had a beard and everything. They haven't shaved him, and he just gave me this little whiplash smile. And I was like, "Man, that's awesome. That's a picture I'm going to frame."
Because I was at the end. That's all I can say. That my accident was the end of the story as far as I was concerned.
Now he's walking around with no cane, no walker, still his same funny self and cracking jokes, and I think he's back to probably where he was before the accident.
I think Mr. Crum is honestly God's miracle. I mean, it's a beautiful thing to see whenever your patients come in like that and they actually succeed.
I think every community needs a go-to whenever there is a bad trauma. And USA Medical Center provides that to Southern Alabama, as well as Southern Mississippi, and maybe even parts of Florida at times.
I love USA Medical Center, the trauma center. I love working with those guys. They're a great team.
I think it's awesome that it's a facility that close that can manage just about anything we throw at them. We have them that close to collaborate and to have for the community as well.
Level 1 trauma centers have just top-of-the-line equipment. They have all the proper doctors and surgeons. So there's just, the resources are, just plentiful whenever it comes to things like that. So
I can't say enough about the care we were shown. And I truly believe that if they would not have been that way, had they not been so caring at the bedside, I don't know that he would have ever responded.
I think it's very important for this hospital to be here because we're the only level 1 region trauma center in our area. We're able to take care of a very high acuity. So I think that's why it's very important for us to be here.
It was bleak. I mean, in reality, when we look at how he was and what the doctors were saying, it was at that point. We all understood that. And for God to come in and intervene and reverse that and then give him another chance, I'm joyful, I'm happy, and I'm thankful, and I'm jubilated, elated to this day. I just can't say thank you to the Lord enough for what he did, how he spared him.
If I had everybody here in the room that had anything to do with him, we owe you his life. I mean, we owe you, our whole family at this point has received this gift because of what they did.
We need them. We need them in our lives. And they do, that's what their talent is, that's what their gift is, and they chose that as a profession. And he needed those people to take care of him, like we all do if something happens to us.
Thank you. I didn't know any of them. Even the helicopter pilot, I didn't know him. But I just thank him for bringing me back to life. That's all I can say, because they brought me back. I was in Never Land. And there again, I'm old. I should have been cutting the tree down.